podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Humans of Speedway podcast, where we chat to some of the stars of the sport, both on and off the track, who make the sport what it is, one of the most exciting white-knuckle sports in the world. I'm Ian Brannan. A bit about me. I've been a radio presenter and voiceover artist my whole working life, over 20 years now. You might even have shouted at me on the phone, because I'm one of those people that tells you to press 1 for this and 2 for that. But I've been going to Speedway since as long as I can remember. In fact, I went to the 1977 World Final in Sweden before I was even born. Now, obviously, I don't remember much about the night Ivan Major won his 5th world title on a wet evening in Gothenburg, but I was there. In this series, I want to look at the background of some of the stars both on and off the track that make our sport what it is. And how did they find their way to Speedway and the journey that it's taken them on? In this first episode, I'm joined by a man who has won everything there is to win in British Speedway. He's represented his country at the highest level and also flown the British flag for many years with 82 Speedway GP appearances, 4-time league champion and 7-time British champion. I'm pleased to welcome our first Human of Speedway, Scott Nicholls.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
I mentioned some of your honours there and a bit of your CV, but going back to the very, very start, as a young lad in the east of England, I imagine around about the early 80s, because you were born, same as me, 1978. What's your very first memory of getting on any kind of bike?
God, well, to be fair, probably in some ways I don't clearly remember the first time I got on a bike, because they say you kind of, your memories don't form properly until you're kind of around about 4 years old. And I think I was 3.5 the first time I actually went on a motorcycle. So one of my first memories, actually, I was about 4.5. Me and another ride, actually, Richard Wright, the goalkeeper, sort of a good goalkeeper, played for Arsenal and places like that.
Yeah.
Me and him used to ride around before the grass track meetings, because I think you had to be 5 to race, 5 or 6 to actually race properly. So me and him used to ride around before the meeting, because I've got an older brother who used to ride, and Richard's got an older brother as well, Stuart. So yeah, we used to ride around before the meetings, and that was fun. But I remember this one particular day. It was at a place, Easton, out in Suffolk, near Easton Farm Park, and the track was on a little bit of a slope. It was a little bit wet, and they were like, "Oh, just go steady, Scott. Take it easy. It's a little bit slippery." I was like, "Yeah, okay." And off I went whizzing down the straight. Didn't pay any attention, did I? Just like went into the corner, fell off over the handlebars, open face crash helmet, head first into a cow pat. So that was probably, yeah, one of my first memories. Probably not the fondest, but still, nonetheless, it was fun. And I remember kind of picking myself up and splitting my lip. And weirdly enough, I still remember a very vivid picture of the strawberry lolly the lady in the canteen truck gave me to try and take the taste away of the cow muck.
Oh, I mean, that is the glamour, isn't it, that?
It is, the strawberry lolly and a boily burger. That was as good as it got then.
Yeah, the catering at Speedway has never really improved massively, has it, over the time?
It's not state of the art, is it? It's not. You're not kind of Michelin star rated, but do you know what? After having cow muck in your mouth, a boily burger tasted pretty damn good.
So that's really it, because I was thinking when I was asking you that question that you were talking about, getting on like a little push bike or something like that. But to be actually on a motorbike at 3.5, that is early.
It was. I was a young starter. And no particular reason. I mean, I certainly wasn't forced or kind of pressured into it. I just kind of obviously had a love for it. Just wheels and just being active. I was a very active kid. I was always running around, jumping off stuff. And I think I was like 2.5 when I first was riding a bike with no stabilisers. I don't even think I actually had stabilisers. I think my dad kind of, just said, "Oh, let's see how we go." And away I went. So, kind of wheels have been a massive part of my life for a very long time.
Yeah, they certainly have. That's incredible. And you mentioned there about grass track. I mean, you did do quite a lot of that before getting onto the speedway that we all know, the dirt track speedway. So you were schoolboy champion by the time you were 15.
Yeah, grass track. I mean, I always say, excuse the pun, but it's a grassroots sport. I mean, it was the breeding ground for so many like very, very good speedway riders. I mean, Mark Loram, Joe Screen, Gary Havelock. I mean, just to name a couple. I mean, they all came through the grass track ranks and were very, very good. And it's a shame that grass track has kind of died off a little bit, because that really was kind of the stepping stone. And for those that are not familiar, grass track is very, very similar to speedway. Principally, it's the same. The bikes are slightly different. Grass track bikes do have a little bit of rear suspension, a slightly bigger bike, but it's in a field, so you need a little bit more suspension because the tracks are generally bumpier, and it's more of a physical sport. But it was. I spent a long time on the grass track. It wasn't until my kind of last year of schoolboy grass track when I was 15 that I won the British Championship in that. I won a few kind of British rounds, and I was Supreme Champion, which is like almost equivalent like the Grand Prix series in a way. But you know what? I had the best my parents could afford, but we couldn't afford the top stuff, and so I was always a little bit kind of under speed and underpowered with my bikes. And it wasn't until that last year that we got a bike that was a lot more competitive, and I won the British final in '93. So it was cool. And I carried on with the grass track for a few more years after that, combining that with the speedway. But I finally sort of closed the door on grass track at the end of 2000. So that was my last year. I did a couple of kind of invitational races, should I say, after that. But that was kind of because I wanted to really focus on the speedway.
And I suppose that you're at this point in your life around then when you've got to decide what direction career-wise you're going to go in. You could tell that speedway was going to be more than just a hobby to you.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, there was always a love and a desire, and I think it's when those little things when you're a kid. I mean, I still remember one day just randomly when I was at primary school, like having taken a pair of goggles in with me and putting them on my desk. It was like it's just weird how you do these things, but it was it's the teachers. I remember even at primary school, the teachers say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And it'd be like, "Oh, I want to be a fireman, or I want to be a policeman, and I want to be a doctor." And it was always, I want to race speedway. I mean, that was always what I wanted to do as a kid. And so, no, I did. I kind of pushed for it, but it wasn't always the way. I mean, reality sort of kicked in, and when I was probably like 15 or so, I mean, there was still a massive desire to be a speedway rider and do that as a living. But at the same time, I wasn't 100% sure if it was going to be a viable option and financially. So, for work experience, I mean, I did import export and I toyed with being an accountant. So it's like
really?
A total contrast to racing motorcycles. But that was very short lived. I realised that a calculator and a pen wasn't for me.
I was just going to say, actually, because on my bedroom wall when I was a youngster, on one wall I had speedway stuff, pictures of Gary Havelock. Mainly, and on the other wall it was like pictures of radio stations, and I went down the radio route. So what would you've obviously alluded to the fact that maybe accountancy or something like that might have been something you were interested in.
Yeah, I certainly didn't have pictures of calculators on my wall.
That would be extreme.
It would be a little bit. Do you know what? I wasn't a massive poster man. I mean, if I had a few posters, I would have posters of motocross riders and I would have a few speedway things, but I wasn't like an avid kind of. I wasn't one of those people that if you walked in my room would go, oh, here's a massive motorcycle. No, it wasn't like that. It never was, and I'm still now. I mean, wherever I've lived, my house has never been like a shrine to speedway or anything like that. I mean, I very, very rarely have trophies and pictures out on display. Although I'm very proud of what I've done, I'm very proud to be part of Speedway, and it's a massive part of my life now. I have a strong passion for it. It's home is home for me, and it's kind of I like to kind of be away from those things. So no, I did have the posters on the walls and things like that, but it was always something I wanted to do, and so there wasn't necessarily the visual aspects there, but within me, I always wanted to do it.
Who was your speedway hero then? Who did you sort of look up to when you were younger and sort of aspiring to make it professionally?
When I was a kid, it was no question. It was John Cook, Cowboy Cook, the American rider. He was, he was just such a talent on a bike, and it wasn't so much that he had that aura about him that he was world champion material, and he was going to be. It was just what he did on a bike was breathtaking, and he was a showman, the wheelies and the way he was as a person. He was just so flamboyant, and he was brilliant with the fans, and he was always just chucking his goggles away. I always remember he had a brand of goggles called Amy, and he used to just throw them away. And I'm very fortunate for me. I mean, he became a kind of a good friend. I raced with him together in Sweden, and and then in the winters I'd go and stay with him for a bit, and we'd go snowboarding and stuff. And that was quite surreal, for somebody to kind of be a mate with the person who was your idol as a kid. That was pretty cool and pretty special. And so yeah, for me it was just the way he was as a rider. He was just so entertaining to watch. So he was my role model and idol as a kid. And then things change. I mean, as later in the years, I had an awful lot of respect, and I was good friends with Billy Hamill, and he helped me, gave me a fair few pointers and tips and advice in my career. And which is strange. You find through Speedway that when you do start coming up through the ranks and you start kind of being a threat to people, that some people are not too forthcoming, want to help you. They don't want to see you overtake them, so they kind of don't actually help you. Whereas Billy was the total opposite. He was just like, in his American way, he just said, look, you know what, I see a lot of me in you, and if I can help, I will. And so he was really cool to me, and I have a lot of time and respect for Billy as well.
That's really nice, though, isn't it? Because, like you say, it's a very competitive business, Speedway, and for somebody who that point obviously leading the world really in Speedway, and also I think he was one of the first to sort of really get social media wasn't really around, but he was certainly online and stuff, wasn't he, Billy Hamill? I remember he was one of the first Speedway riders I can remember that had a website.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, him and Greg did the X-Side thing. I mean, they're very, very innovative, but kind of very ahead of their time. I mean, Tony Rickardson was very good at the whole corporate sponsorship thing as well. But I think, it's fair to say that I think Billy and Greg kind of kicked it off to start with. And Greg's still fantastic on social media. I mean, Greg is, I think in nowadays, there's different angles you can look at riders. I mean, there's some riders you can look at purely for their racing, for their fitness and their dedication and stuff. But I mean, there's an all-round package. I mean, Greg, I don't think you could find anyone better to model yourself on. He doesn't go out there and proclaim to be the fittest, most dynamic athlete in the world, but man alive, he can still deliver on a bike, and the way he is with the fans, and the way he is on social media, and the way he's kind of always just pushing and developing things. I mean, that's pretty special. So yeah, going back to Billy, they were very much ahead of their time, and for someone like that who was chasing, when kind of he was helping me, that was when he was at his peak, when he was chasing world championships. And it is, it's like I say, a lot of people don't want to give anybody a helping hand if they see them as a threat, but he wasn't that way. He just was like obviously very confident in his own abilities and his own talent, and was like, you know what, if you go in a race, he didn't want to lose at all, but he was like, if you beat me in a race, hands down, you've beat me, then you deserve to beat me. So that was a cool way of looking at it.
You're listening to the Humans of Speedway podcast. I'm Ian Brannan, and in this episode, I'm in conversation with 7 times British champion Scott Nicholls. Now, Scott, your first full Speedway break was as a 16-year-old with Peterborough. It was a day you'll never forget for a number of reasons. Can you take us back to that day in 1994?
Yeah, I was 16 in May. 16th of May, I turned 16, but obviously that was right in the middle of my exams. So I'd signed, but I said that I wouldn't actually start racing until, I had the kind of sense to say, look, you know what, I want to get my exams out of the way first. So I actually made my debut on June the 29th. And it was an odd day, really, because I had a mix of emotions, being so excited about and making my professional debut and nervous and all the other things. But also my granddad died that day as well. So it was kind of a bit of an odd one. I was kind of going to do my first professional meeting, and my granddad had just sort of departed the world that afternoon. And obviously I was too young to drive. So, fair play to my dad. He still said, look, you know what, you've, this is your career and this is part of your journey. So he still drove me to the race along with a real good mate of mine, Stevie, who was my mechanic for years. And went there. It was at Long Eaton, and yeah, it was still a really cool day. I mean, I enjoyed the track. It was a track I actually enjoyed going to. It looked a bit rough and ready, but it actually rode really quite nice. And it was. It's not a day I'm going to forget.
While it was nerve-wracking being your first meeting, was it also an escape from the events earlier in the day?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's impossible to think of two things at the same time, and as much as it was my granddad, my focus was the racing, and but it had to be. It was my first race in my professional career, and I was bricking it. It was, I was like, this little 16 spotty little kid, and turning up at Long Eaton in what was the first division then, which is equivalent now the championship, and Long Eaton for anyone who'd been, I mean, sadly, Long Eaton no longer is there, but it was quite an intimidating place in a way. I mean, on the back straight, there was like a raised bank where, people could park their cars along there. And so after the race, when the one of the Long Eaton invaders won, they'd all flash their lights and beep their horns, and that's really cool. But as a young kid going there, and the track looked a bit rough, and there was some like dark bits, and then there was like, I remember Martin Dixon rode for them. Yeah, I mean, a proper lovely guy, but I mean, he had the name Martin Mad Dog Dixon. Well, as a 16-year-old, you're thinking, oh my God, why the hell's he got this name Mad Dog? And so it was. But you know what? I held my own. I can't remember. I think I got, like 6 points or something like that.
It's not a bad start.
No, so yeah, I did okay, and yeah, it was nice. Once the nerves settled and got the butterflies out of the way about it being my first race. I mean, obviously the first race is the one, isn't it? You're going there and it's just man alive. Everything's tingling. Your heart rate is through the roof, and you're physically kind of almost shaking because you're so nervous. And when you're at the start line, you're sitting there. The green light comes on, and your fingers are just twitching like mad because you're so keen to get going, but also so excited, so nervous, so many emotions all rolled into one. But once that tape goes, everything's gone. You're then focused on doing the best you can in that 60 or so seconds that you've got to do your job.
I imagine it's almost like leaping off a cliff. You've got the bike fired up, full revs, waiting for the tapes to go up. And once the tapes do go up, it's just kind of an instinct of, right, just need to cling on for a minute now.
It is. It's autopilot, all those natural instincts. I mean, even though obviously it's an adult job now and it's professional and you're being paid and there's the pressures of the team and pressures of the fans, etc. It's still, everything else is still fundamentally the same as the first time you did it as a kid. It's a race, and nobody wants to be last in a race. Everybody wants to win the race. So all those natural instincts just come back, and it is the same. Like you say, once that clutch goes, that's it. It's then you're in autopilot, and then it's just focused on the race.
You can't have done too badly, though, because it wasn't too long before you were in the GB team. A couple of years later, about a few years later, you fast forward to your first full GB call-up. I'm looking at the Speedway World Cup final.
Yeah, it did. It kind of in some ways went quite quickly, and I think things were a little bit different then. Fortunately, the lads now, they do, we have kind of like the academy leagues or the conference leagues, whatever you like, a development league, should I say. Whereas for myself and the riders kind of before me, they're a little bit older than me, your likes, your Mark Lorams and your Joe Screen and stuff, there was no stepping stone league. It was, like you said, leap of faith. It was almost, that was it. It was kind of, you went for, I didn't even have junior races after meeting. It was literally, me and kind of, there's a few like Lee Lanham and a few other riders like that. We used to do demonstration races before the meeting at Ipswich and places like that when we were too young to race. But the moment we turned 16, we were thrown in the deep end, straight in the team. And I think in some ways that kind of possibly helped get to those, like you say, Team GB things a little bit quicker, because there was no kind of, let's get his confidence up, which I think is a good thing. It was like sink or swim.
Yeah.
And, the armbands were gone and we had to get on with it. So it was, being part of Team GB, that was something I was hugely proud of. And, we came very, very close on a few occasions. Sadly, never in my time secured the gold, which was tough.
How do you think the GB team has developed over these recent years? Because it's also been a thing that Ty Woofenden has had thoughts on as well. Are we in a position now, do you think, that going forward that things are sorted out and we're in the right direction and to compete with the likes of the Danes and the Poles and the Aussies and so on in the next 10 years? I
certainly think so. I think what's great is, I kind of walked away from it for similar reasons to what Ty was on about. And, so I don't want to be negative about it. I think what's great now is that the way they've got something, they're putting together a team and a structure where they're at least doing what they can to try and push the Poles and the Danes and the Swedes and the ones who have been more successful than us in the past. I think that they've got people involved there that can help develop the riders. I think what's important as well is they're looking at not just the team, they're looking at the riders that are not quite ready to be in that position, but who potentially in the future could be. I think that's what's the important thing, is we need to look at the younger lads, even younger than what we're looking at right now, to try and bring them through, to give them those bits of advice, to, like I highlighted earlier, to help them with, not overload them, but to help them with little pointers on, mental strengths and psychologies and physical strengths and diets and things like that. Just little bits and pieces, that can just point them in the right direction, so these things become part of their normal life, and then they become physically, mentally stronger without it being a chore and a burden. It's just part of everyday life for them. And I think it's going to take a little bit of time. It's a process, but I think it's great for British Speedway that we have something there. And I've kind of spoken to the people involved with it a little bit on a couple of things, and kind of sort of had a little bit of just given my input for what it's worth on little bits and pieces. I think that maybe additional things they could do to try and help develop the riders, and that's the great thing, is that they're open to other opinions and for people to help. I think it's, as I say, it's much more of a longer term fix, but I think it's fantastic that we have that infrastructure there.
This is Humans of Speedway, getting to know the story behind some of the stars of the sport, both on and off the track. I'm Ian Brannan, and in this first episode, we're talking to multiple British champion, league winner, Grand Prix star, and purveyor of a snazzy shirt, Scott Nicholls. Before the end of this podcast, we're going to be attempting to create Scott's ultimate fantasy speedway meeting. Who will be in his all-time top 7? We'll find out before the end. First though, Scott, I want to talk to you about your time with your hometown club. Being an Ipswich lad, signing for the Witches must have been the dream.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, it's definitely where I started out my career. And I think it's, for most, not just speedway riders, I mean, sports professionals, whatever it is, I think it's always a dream and something that you want to do, is to race for your local club. I think it's something that will always be something that people hold close to their hearts, because it's where you're from and that's where your family and friends are from and everything else. But I did, and I did my demonstration races there. I used to go have a practice after meeting as a kid and stuff like that. So I was always wanting to race for Ipswich. But ironically, like you say, I first joined Peterborough for the first season because I was aware that I didn't like big tracks. I'd always grown up on small tracks, and I figured that the only way I'd kind of come to terms with it and deal with actually riding big tracks better would be to have one as my home track, which is why I chose Peterborough. But then, like you say, I did spend quite a few years at Ipswich. I loved being there, and it was a good club, and I liked the track, and obviously it was nice being on my doorstep. But it got to a point, it was ironically after the most successful team probably in the history of Speedway, 98, I decided that I felt like I needed to spread my wings and stand on my own 2 feet a little bit more. I felt like I needed to get away from the creature comforts of racing for your hometown club and spread out. So that was when I went to Poole for a couple of years, and I think that definitely helped my career, and was something that I'm glad I did, because it was something I had to meet new people, and I was actually really quite a shy person, and I had to make new friends, new acquaintances. I had to deal with different people and different situations, and I think that's something that was good for my career, and I certainly don't regret doing that. I think it was something that was good for me to do, and it's something I'd encourage other riders to do.
Things went up a notch with the Speedway Grand Prix series. Your first encounter with the Speedway GPs, though, was in the days when things were slightly more humble. The British Grand Prix was held at Brandon Stadium in Coventry back then, when it was just a smaller series than what we know now, and before the days of massive stadiums in Cardiff. You were a wild card that day.
Yeah, that's it. The Grand Prix were over much shorter, sort of 5-6 rounds, and obviously it's fantastic to see how they've grown. But it was at Coventry that was my first ever kind of experience of Grand Prix Speedway, and that was when there was the 24 riders, where you kind of had the knockout system and stuff like that, and I didn't fare too great. I did okay. I think I might hurt my hand or something just before it, but that's no excuse. I mean, that was another level, but it was still a great experience for me, and it was really cool to be part of that. And obviously, I knew I wanted to be part of the GP scene at some point in my career.
And you were, because then Cardiff did come along, and you got that first experience there. What was that like the first time? Because you obviously have ridden there a number of times, but what's that first experience like of riding in a stadium like that that's so much different to anything else really on the calendar? Because it's a stadium doesn't always have a speedway track in it, but it's just got so many more people in there as well.
Oh yeah, it's really quite overwhelming. And I think, nowadays all sports professionals are kind of way more switched on with, the psychology of sports and dietitian and everything else. Back then it wasn't so readily available online and things like that. It was all, it was much more kind of secretive back then. But it was, I mean, mentally it would just be really tough. I found it hard. I mean, it would be, you've got the pressures of trying to perform to your best against the best in the world, which is enough pressure on that in itself. And then you walk out of that tunnel to the track, and you look up and you just see this sea of flags of Union Jacks and St George's Crosses and Welsh Dragons, and you're just like, oh my god, like I've never seen this many people at a speedway event before in my life, and the noise is just phenomenal. And then that there's TV cameras there, and there's all these people watching from around the world, and there's no hiding. You ride like a plonker, and it sticks out like a sore thumb. You're going to get your rear end well and truly kicked. So there's a massive amount of pressure. So mentally, probably more than anything, you're going in there just going, oh my god. And I did struggle with that for some time in the Grand Prix as a whole, and it wasn't, and I probably kind of learned a bit about the psychology side of things and how to deal with that probably a bit late on, and that was something I struggled with. I think that's a huge part of it. It's easy to say it's just any other race, but it's not. It's totally not. And so yeah, for in that respect, Cardiff is something that is very enjoyable, but is the pressures and the nerves associated with it early doors were not really that enjoyable in some respects.
What was the thing that played on your mind the most? Was it the fact that there were so many people watching, or was it the level of the competition that you were at? What was your sort of inner fear, really?
It's probably the amount of people there, and the knowing that all the eyes are on you as well. And the other thing as well, especially at Cardiff, is that every rider gets a brilliant reception there, which I think is great. I think that's what's so cool about Speedway as a whole. Is it's a very family orientated sport. But even when you do the track walk before the meeting starts, and the stadium is not nowhere near full at that point, because you're doing your track walk probably an hour or so before the actual meeting's going to start, and it's as you're walking around, the air horns are following you as you're walking around the track, and it wasn't until I kind of learned the ability and the kind of the mindset of flipping that to your advantage and kind of using that as a kind of a support mechanism as opposed to a crippler. Initially it was early, you're like, oh my god, all these people want you to do so well, and it's lovely, but you're just like, oh my god, I'm letting if I ride like an absolute plonker, I'm letting all these people down, and then there's all the people on TV, and so as much as that you're up against these amazingly talented riders who you were worried about trying to beat, I think it was the fact that there's so many people there watching you, wanting you to do well, that you felt really bad if you let them down. As much as you, first and foremost, you don't want to disappoint yourself. But it was, so there is massive pressure, and you can understand why riders sometimes underperform in situations like that, or touch your tapes and get nervous, because there's the pressure to win, but it's also the pressures that they're feeling from the people that want them to do well. And although everybody there wants people to do well and is willing them on, it can actually have the adverse effect on some people if they can't flick that switch in their mind to use it to their advantage.
And such fine margins on the day as well. You could move an inch and it could be all over for you.
It is massively game over, and also at places like Cardiff, because they're one-off events, the ruts at the start line get really, really deep. So because we have to be within a certain kind of margin away from the tapes, you roll your bike back, but because if you can imagine, your back wheel is on a rut, so the bike is always trying to push forward anyway, and we don't have brakes, so you're trying to hold the bike back. So the moment you kind of dip your clutch or slightly let the weight off the bike to try and anticipate any movement, the bike is naturally going to push forward even more than if you're on a flat surface. So all those things get accentuated and become more critical. And obviously in the Grand Prix, the refs are very vigilant, and and so you've got the start line. There's a huge amount of pressure.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting you mentioned that, because I think a lot of people don't realise that obviously the thing weighs quite a bit, but then to think that you're effectively holding it on a hill is it's not easy.
No, it's not. And obviously on our left foot we have the steel shoe, which you get no grip with as well. So, it can be. It sounds like I'm moaning a bit, don't I? Really, but it's just trying to give people a bit of an idea of the kind of added pressures you have, I suppose, is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, it's not as easy as it looks. While we're on the subject, though, there was the one famous incident, I think in 2009, which gets probably brought out on your BT Sport appearances in the past annually. You've obviously patched things up with Emil since.
Yeah, we have, and he's a good lad. I mean, it was just, we were polar opposites that night. Man, that was my last year in the Grand Prix, and I was having an absolute shocker of a year. And like you said, I was feeling the pressures of performing badly in the Grand Prix, and then to be in Cardiff, I wasn't having a great night there either. And Emma was on the opposite end of it. It was his first year in the Grand Prix, and he had like a sensation. One in Prague, he was just flying on top of the world, but he was struggling in Cardiff, and we had a kind of, it wasn't even a coming together on the track. I think it was just, I kind of run him, not, I wouldn't even say hard, on the kind of last bend of the last lap of the race we met, and he ran the last, and obviously he was feeling the pressures and wasn't happy. I suppose his bubble had burst a little bit that night, and he kind of reacted, and I was I was just not in the best place to be provoked, and we had kind of handbags at dawn, and it was all a bit of fun, and you know what, like 10 years later, and it's still kind of one of the biggest talking points of Speedway, and I make this joke every time, but I brought it up when we went to we had to go in the FIM jury to be disciplined, and we got fined, and told about we shouldn't conduct ourselves in that way, etc., etc. And I did sort of tongue in cheek say, well, actually, instead of fining us, I think you should be paying us royalties, because this is going to give you more exposure than anything else from tonight.
That's about right.
I was given a little nudge by the representative, kind of representing me at the time, as if to say, I suggest you shut your mouth right now. So I did, but I still stand to that. You know what? It's kind of, if it got an airtime, I think me and Emma would be doing quite well out of it.
You should have bought the footage, and every time they run it, they had to pay you.
Exactly, that's what I mean. Royalty, we should have done, because and then people go on about it. I go, who won the Grand Prix that night? And no one can remember.
No,
so,
absolutely not.
It was Jason Crump, by the way.
Oh, was it right? Yeah. Well, it's a good reminder because everybody. There was only one moment that people remember, and you were it.
Exactly, and I think he went through the card as well.
Wow, and all overshadowed by you and Emil.
Yeah.
This is the Humans of Speedway podcast. I'm Ian Brannan. Joining me today is 7 times British champion Scott Nicholls. Now, Scott, we're going to be talking your fantasy speedway meeting shortly. So thinking cap on, we're thinking of ideal, ultimate teammates, ultimate stadiums, all that kind of stuff. But first, I want to look at your time at Coventry, because it's an iconic British speedway team, sadly no longer with us, but you are their most successful captain and probably will remain that way for quite some time yet. But a special time.
It was, again, another one of those periods where I'd been at Ipswich for a few years again, and I kind of felt I was just getting itchy feet again, and felt I needed to move and do something to kind of rechannel my focus, I suppose, and again, meet new people. Now it's part of I love kind of going to new clubs, because I get to meet new people and make new acquaintances, and I think that's something that's great about Speedway, and for me personally, I love that. And Coventry was a club that I had very, very fond memories of. It was when Mr. Sandhu was in charge of the club and Colin Pratt ran it. It was an exceptional club. It was run clockwork. Colin was a very, very organised and very disciplined man. Everything was done spot on. The track 9 times out of 10 was very well prepared, and it was just, there was a good sense of leadership from the top of the club, which then sets a good precedent for the riders, and I was captain, and we did have a very successful time there, and it was captaincy that I was very honoured and privileged to have been, and but again, then I would say, people would say, how do you feel as being captain, and da da da, and I'd say, you know what, I love being captain, and I'm very proud and honoured to be that person. But yeah, when a team is successful, like we had that run of the 3 years there, we had very good success. One year in particular, it was a team. It's not the captain then. I mean, I've always said this. I almost like there's 7 captains when you've got a team that gels together well like that. Because on paper, we weren't the strongest team that year when we won everything. We weren't on paper the strongest team, but we had such a good sense of team spirit and camaraderie between ourselves, and kind of spurred each other on, that my captain's role was eased up a little bit, really, because the other 6 guys, everybody was mucking in and helping each other. So I think we had kind of almost like 7 captains. I was just fortunate enough to have the little C beside my name in the programme.
And you being a 7-time British champion, I can't believe that we've not really mentioned this. I mean, is there one of the 7 that's sweeter than them all?
Yeah, the one. Obviously, the first one's always cool because it's something you're striving for. But I think the 2011, I think it was, or 12, I can't remember now. It was obviously that sweet, I can't remember. It was the year I went to Swindon when Lee Adams retired, and I went to fill his shoes. And I mean, God, I mean, it's you talk about pressures. I mean, I don't think there's anybody rode Swindon better than Lee Adams, and so I knew I had massive boots to fill there, and Swindon was kind of a track I enjoyed, but it seemed to be a bit of a jinx track for me. But anyway, I was under big pressure to go there, and I was just struggling. I had a shocker of a year at Swindon. I was getting booed by the home fans. It was like, and that's never nice. That's really tough. And anybody that knows me knows that I'll give 100% every race, and I was racing my backside off, but just was not delivering the goods. So for me to win the British final that year that meant a lot to me, because I kind of really wanted and needed that reassurance that you can still do this. You can still mix it with the best guys, because I was getting my backside kicked and it was tough. So that's probably the one and that was at Wolverhampton. That's probably the one that for me probably stands out, just because I was having such a tough domestic year that year.
Triumph over adversity is always a good story. Now, before you go, Scott, you're a man of the Speedway world. One thing I'd like to do is see if we can create your Speedway paradise. The ultimate meeting in the ultimate venue with the ultimate people. In true Speedway style, let's see if we can do it in less than 2 minutes. So if you're ready, here we go. First question then is, what would be your ultimate track?
Well, I prefer small tracks, but Rzeszów in Poland was a pretty cool track.
So the next question is, which stadium would you put that track in?
Well, we can't use Cardiff, so I'll go with Bellevue. The new Bellevue is pretty special.
So we're having the meeting with the Rzeszów track in the Bellevue Stadium. Who's going to be your teammates on that day? This could be a tricky one. You can have any rider, alive, dead, past, present. Over to you.
Okay, well, they're definitely alive, and mine would be a fun team to be in. It'd have to be Cookie, my childhood hero, Billy Hamill, Mark Lorham, Jono, Steve Johnson, Joe Screen, and Billy Gennaro. I think that would be a pretty sensational team.
That does sound like, a good road trip with them as well, I think.
Oh, God, yeah. I think we'd all be in AA afterwards, but there we go.
Now, this meeting, especially with that lineup, is going to need a little bit of order. Who would be the referee for this meeting?
Tony Steele. He's always fair, and he's a good referee.
Now, you're probably going to be needing a spanner man who can. Who would be your mechanic for this dream meeting?
Stevie, affectionately known as Gutty. He's been with me. Man Live, we talk about stuff. He's been with me but he was with me since I was 11 years old. So, in my testimonial, I think he had missed about 5 of my meetings. So he had been a massive, so he knows me better than anyone.
Now, people at the BSPA would be probably shaking in their boots at this, but supposing we put Scott Nicholls in charge of the rule book, what would be the first rule you would change?
God, 1? Am I only allowed 1? Okay.
The first one.
Okay, all right. If we couldn't have the sport run independently, then I would go with fix a points limit for 3 years, increase it as well, but fix it for 3 years so teams can build and try and work as a team.
Yeah, so you can sign for longer contracts and stuff.
Yes, yeah.
And a team from any time in history, from any league in the world, who would be the opposition?
Ipswich of 98, because that was hands down probably the best team in British Speedway.
Wow. That's a good
question.
So
we might get our back ends kicked, but it would be a fun night.
It's been brilliant talking to you, Scott. Thanks very much for your time. And I wish you all the best when you do finally get back on the track.
Let's hope that's soon. Thanks a lot.
My thanks to Scott Nicholls for joining me on this very first episode of the Humans of Speedway podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. Of course, don't forget to subscribe so you get any future episodes straight to your device. And if you'd like to give us a comment or suggest names you'd like to hear in this podcast, it'd be great to hear from you too. See you next time for the Humans of Speedway.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this basketball season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection for a wide variety of stats, and place your entry. It's as easy as that. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and injury insurance on your picks are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Ready to test your skills? Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million players who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/get100 and use code GET100. That's code GET100 at prizepicks.com/get100 for a first deposit matchup to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.